I'm going to go back. All right. Hello, everybody. Hello. Hello. Welcome. Welcome to the Kelly Writers House. Welcome to Why Is It So Hard to Write Plays About Climate Change, which is to say, welcome to a conversation that we are so excited to have, led by Sam Frisky with Madeleine George. Let's give both of them, to start off, a big round of applause. I wanted to preface this conversation with a couple of things. First, I wanted to say this program developed out of a fantastic proposal by Samantha Frisky. This was about activating playwriting at Writers House. This was about saying playwriting is alive and well at Penn. This was about saying students have voices and a lot to say. And so I hope for those of you who are student playwrights in the audience, or playwrights in training, or people who are thinking about playwriting, or people who are interested in playwriting, you'll have questions for both of these people. That's one of the goals of this conversation. Sam's going to describe our format, but as this is happening, think of some questions. And I hope the questions will continue. After this formal part, we'll have a reception in the back, and you are all welcome. So I'm going to hand it over to Sam, and I'm so excited.
Cool, me too. Is this mic on? So this is going to open with the opening monologue from Hurricane Diane, which is Madeleine George's play about a permaculture gardener dripping with butch charm. And after Breyer opens us up with that monologue, we're going to hand it over to Abby and Brent, who are going to read a scene from Act 2 of the play that I'm writing, All the Dead Frogs, for my creative thesis here at Penn. So I really think we should just kick it off with the work itself and then talk about it in our conversation, followed by the Q&A portion. So Breyer, if you're good to go.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Am I close enough to the mic for it to be effective? No?
Oh, yeah, there you go. Get in there.
Is that effective? Oh, yeah, I can hear it. Thank you. I have returned, and it begins. Recognize me? No? God of agriculture, wine, and song? It's cool, it's been a while. I am called by many names. Bacchus, Bromius, Dionysus. I was born many thousands of years ago, sprang fully formed from my father's thigh, crossed the foamy seas of the Aegean to Asia Minor, then traveled on foot down to Thrace, hunting and reveling and bringing ruin to those who doubted me. I was huge back then. My name was on the lips and tongue of every frustrated housewife in the greater Mediterranean. How I worked my mysteries is, I would ride into town on a leopard, or a bull, or a leopard-bull hybrid if they had one handy. My rose gold curls billowing behind me, and I'd call out, "Women! My women! Come to me." And they always came. I never had a problem with them coming. Then I'd draw them out, my Bacchae, out past the city walls, out into the fragrant wilderness beyond. There they'd taste my honey, gulp my wine, thrash and writhe and weep and dance and stroke animals and lie with animals and tear animals limb from limb and become animals and cry out my name over and over. This is in my heyday I'm talking about. And then it was so weird. They forgot about me. At first, they still knew my name, but it started to have, like, a quaint ring to it, or, like, air quotes around it, you know, Dionysus. And then it devolved into an adjective, something any imposter could be, Dionysian. And then, I mean, you know your own story. You start to settle for ecstasy knockoffs, creature comforts, customer satisfaction, and at a certain point, I just stopped putting myself out there. But gods don't die, they just change form. We're still with you, all of us. I mean, they don't care about you. Those other guys, Hermes, Apollo, I haven't heard from those assholes in centuries. But I stayed close to you. I don't know why. Maybe because I was born a mortal woman? I've kept busy over the last years. I mean, sailor, stripper, rock star, mayor. Most recently, I've been living outside of Burlington, Vermont. I had my own landscaping business up there with a focus on sustainability and small-scale permaculture. And I've been happy. Vermont is a fucking paradise. Great hiking trails, curbside compost collection. I was living off the grid with a bunch of lesbian separatists in a consensus-based community. I'd have every intention of staying forever. But you've been busy, too, haven't you? Mining and stripping and slashing and burning and generally despoiling the green earth that gave you life. It's not like I haven't been aware of your misdeeds. I've been watching you fuck shit up for hundreds of years. And I've been objecting through all the usual channels. I've signed the petitions, marched in the marches. But it's like you're in some kind of trance. I'm looking at you and you don't know. You don't know what time it is on the cosmic clock. How could you? With your bird lives, your fruit fly lives, hatching and feeding and breeding and dying, all in the blink of a god's eye. So let me tell you what time it is. It is 11:45. If I don't step in now, the glaciers are gonna melt and the permafrost is gonna thaw, and fast forward 100 years and there won't be a single human left on the planet to worship me. And that's not gonna work for me. Okay? My options are dwindling. And the last thing I need is to have to fuck off back to Mount Olympus, the dullest fucking place on the universe, and to chill for all of time by the flame of eternal boredom. So, it's time for a comeback. Picture it. The world reignited into my rights. My ecstasy spreading from village to town until the entire earth hums with organic joy. Every heedless human reawakened to their place in the web of life. We'll see an immediate drop in carbon emissions, the cooling of the oceans, a spike in forest growth. In short, the instant healing of our green planet. Now, I know people can get weird when you come out to them as a demigod, so I'm not going to ride in my guns a-blazing full Greek. My plan is to slide in on the DL, hit him with the landscaping design angle, and then when I'm all the way in, pull out the stops. The minimum number I need to start up a mystery cult is 4. 2 ladies on my right side, 2 ladies on my left. It's a balance thing. I never understood it exactly, but believe me, you don't want to pull off an initiation ritual with fewer than 4 acolytes. So I picked a perfect spot for my kickoff, here in Monmouth County, New Jersey. I see a nice little circular street with 4 ladies all lined up for me in a row. 1, 2, 3, 4, boom. Once my first unit is activated, I'll take off like wildfire, spreading out across the heartland, the fruited plains, bringing live, frenzy, Bacchic realness to Main Street America. Before you know it, we'll be knocking at your door. Nervous? Don't be. It's gonna be okay. It's gonna feel amazing to save the world.
Let's give Briar a round of applause.
Yeah.
That was awesome. Abby and Brent, if you could just swing on over. So this is from the middle of the play that I'm currently working on. And in this scene, Noah, the protagonist, has just been left by her girlfriend, Charlotte, because she was too obsessed, consumed by climate change. And Noah has accepted the proposition of the mayor in the town to make a baby with him as a last-ditch effort to prove that living like a little in like suit is better than never living at all. So Act 2, Scene 5, setting a bedroom. Noah and the mayor are in bed, both in the same level of undress. They have just had sex. The mayor leans against the headrest, absolutely at ease. Noah lies on her back with her head towards the audience. She bends her knees and puts her feet on the headboard.
My grandmother taught me this. It tilts everything up, keeps everything in you longer.
I don't know if you have to do that.
Then what do I do?
I think that's the point. There's not much left to do.
When you don't want to get pregnant from sex like this, there's always so much more to do. Swallow a pill, put something in your arm, tie yourself up inside. But it seems when you want to, you just wait.
Don't frame it like that.
Why not?
Makes it sound like inaction.
It is.
This is action, Noah. A declaration of faith, even. A statement that no matter how bad it gets, how short the life is, it's worth it.
Baby, at best, we have engaged in well-intentioned act of cowardice. Charlotte and I used to talk about having a baby.
Yeah?
Before everything seemed so horrible. Maybe it seemed equally as horrible then, and we convinced ourselves that there was still time for it all to get better. I don't know. We didn't know. We were so young. Baby-faced teenagers planning for the family that we'd build, bodies sticky and naked and entangled on university-issued twin mattresses. It was make-believe. That's all it was. And if it's make-believe, who's to say you can't believe everything's going to be all right, too?
Right.
Do you know the narrative that when two women are dating and the relationship is in trouble and one of them sneaks off and has sex with a man? Very a la blue is the warmest color, the kids are all right. Do you know what I'm talking about? I want you to know that this isn't what that is. This isn't adultery. Charlotte and I aren't together. We're broken up. Through. And while this may mirror that narrative, it inherently isn't that, you know?
Is monologuing a post-sex ritual for you?
Was it any good? The monologue, I mean?
Obviously, much more captivating than the sex itself.
I'm just trying to say it right. Say everything right, I suppose. I have this terrible fear that if I don't say it all quite right, that I'll never be understood again. That this is my last chance.
That's quite a fear.
If this was all there was, this one moment, would it be enough? If some iceberg cracked open right now and took us down with it and plunged us into the depths of the ocean, would it be enough?
What?
If you died right now.
No.
She returns to the beginning position from the opening of the scene.
No. Me either.
Thank you. Okay, so this is the part where we talk, I guess. So Hurricane Diane is your first play that directly addresses climate change. In writing about climate change, you're writing about something that's impending, but also something that's undoubtedly present. I guess my question is, what is it like to write under the given of this will definitely get worse?
It's so interesting. I mean, that monologue. So the play Hurricane Diane that you heard just that little taste of from the top, it's like a sequel to the Bacchae by Euripides, but comic and set in a cul-de-sac in New Jersey. So it's obviously it's an oblique take on climate change, and it's thinking about like questions of complicity and like what it means for us to want to maintain our lifestyle even in the face of overwhelming evidence that we mustn't. And I've been working on it for a while. I've been working on it since 2010. In different ways, on and off. And the monologue has changed a lot. That's at the beginning. But I was just hearing, the most recent production was in New York City in 2019, in February. And that's when that monologue dates from that production. And yet, even so, I was just listening to the tense, the verb tense. She's like, the glaciers are gonna melt and the permafrost is gonna thaw, and I'm like, yeah, it's done. That's already happened. Like the future tense is already expired on that monologue, and it was only February of 2019. I feel already like that it's not that monologue is aged already. That's how rapidly the situation is changing. Not that those people who have been on the front lines of understanding climate change haven't known about it for 30 years or more, but like the sense of the gathering or the rapidity or the exponential increase in speed, I feel like is all around us. So it's I think it's incredibly difficult to write about that. And in the theater is so slow. It's like, it takes years if you're very, very lucky to have your play produced. So it's not a rapid response medium. It's not even, like, I don't know, it's not like social media, and it's not like even filmmaking, I think. So I don't know. I think theater is really good at some stuff. Like, it's really good at helping us think about the human scale part of the problem, like questions of guilt or questions of complacency or questions of betrayal. That's the stuff that people do inside themselves and with each other. And theater is not an amazing medium for dealing with things like how to create systemic solutions, or like what is the origin of this problem in terms of politics or capitalism or industrialization. Like those questions are better handled maybe by other media or other forms. I'm sort of drifting off, I think.
No, I like, not to introduce my own pivot, but I think theater not being a rapid medium, not to speak for you, is one of the reasons 13P got started, is because of the endless play readings, the endless production process. And I was wondering if you could touch on that for people in the room who might not know who 13 Playwrights are.
Yeah, totally. Sam's talking about a company that I was part of that was a collective of 13 playwrights. We formed in 2002 with the intention of producing one play by each one of us and then imploding as an organization. And we were just doing it because we thought, kind of great, and nobody would do our plays because we were, emerging. And it was sort of a turning point in the zeitgeist of the American theatrical landscape, where there were not a lot of second stages. Now there are more second stages. Theaters have more ways to create production opportunity for emerging writers. We like to think that we were sort of a goad to make that happen. But a lot of the playwrights who are in that collective are playwrights you might know now. Like, for example, Anne Washburn, who wrote a play called Mr. Burns, which a lot of people know. Sarah Rule, who's written lots of plays people know and like Eurydice and The Clean House and stuff. So, that was a kind of energy that we tried to put behind speeding things up. But even so, it took us 10 years to do 13 plays. And it's the slowness or the slowness of theater making is also its glory. Like, it's interpersonal and it's relational, and takes place at the speed of like human metabolism. Like, these are its good qualities too. But just in terms of thinking about climate change, like, it's so, I was just listening to your scene too and thinking, like, it's really the way in for you in terms of this question is like, how are people going to treat each other as the world changes?
Yeah.
I mean, there are probably plays that are handling other more systemic questions or bigger questions or more scientific questions.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Absolutely. So with that answer of maybe theater isn't the best medium for systemic change, then what are we doing when we write a play about climate change? If we're not like Diane, who's trying to convince these cul-de-sac women to do something, if we're not viewing ourselves as like everyone in the audience afterwards is gonna go vegan and like sell their car, then what are we doing? Are we documenting? Is it like therapy for ourselves? Like, what was writing Hurricane Diane for you?
Yeah, that's a good question. I did have one woman came up to me after she saw it twice, once in its first production and then again 3 years later in its second production, and she was like, I just want you to know that after I saw this play, I started to recycle. And I was like, that's amazing and only slightly related to the problem that but I mean, right, I mean, you obviously would never write a play in the hopes that people after seeing it would recycle. Like, that's a very low bar that you would not set, I would assume, for writing. But like, I personally feel very in the teeth of this sort of moral catastrophe of living like in an industrialized Western society and having a lot of comforts in my life. Like, for example, I have a car. I eat food that comes through industrialized agriculture. I'm bathed in electric light at this moment. I personally feel like this sort of a phenomenon that a lot of us experience, where we're like literally at brunch talking about wildfires, is ripe for theatrical exploration. Like that is a human problem that has to do with our psychology, and it has to do with our morality, and it's a good subject for drama. And for me, it sort of suggested the Greeks, because they were also interested in, what do you do when you're on the teeth of a moral dilemma, and you're being pulled in directions that feel unsolvable in a certain way. Then on the other hand, I don't want to, I feel like that makes it sound like I don't think there's actions that we should take as individuals and as a society, and that's not true. I do think there are. But I'm interested in that phenomenon of people acting one way and also acting another way simultaneously.
Yeah, absolutely. So you touched on how this is sort of an adaptation, a building upon of the Bacchae. And two of my favorite plays this year, your play Hurricane Diane, but also Passover by Annette Nwandu.
Oh, yeah.
Which is an adaptation built upon of Waiting for Godot to address police brutality. So I was wondering, for the playwrights in the room, do you have any tips on adaptation, on drawing from a text and then adding a social issue or making it fit a social? You look like no.
No, tips. I don't know.
Or your experience.
I think that for me, it's to take a text that pre-exists me and to enter into it. It's I don't know, it's getting free mojo in your playwriting, because it gives you, there's a palette to draw from, there's language to draw from, there's an inheritance of the way that the culture or other cultures have interacted with that source text, that it's you plug in, and now you're firing not just on your own cylinder, but on the cylinders of the work that comes before you. And that can be very energizing, I think. It's constrains you and it liberates you at the same time. Yeah. So, but I think for the playwrights in the room, you know which plays are the ones that you love the most or hate the most. Also a good way to find your adaptation source. And whatever the thing is whatever plays recur in your mind are the ones that demand your speaking back to them.
Yeah.
Do you have those, Sam?
Plays that speak
that you can't get rid of, that you need to write back to?
Yeah, I think Mud by Fornes has
sure.
been stuck in my head in a while. Yeah, I'm gonna read it in Brooke's class again, so I'm very excited. Hi, Brooke. Yeah, cool. To take it back to an issue, to climate change plays in specific, and what might be different about writing a climate change play. On the phone, we touched briefly on waste. So for me, a huge concern is, if All the Dead Frogs, the play that I'm writing, gets put up, I call for a 7-foot iceberg to be in the background to get revealed in Act 2. Is me writing this play and then hopefully doing something and putting something into people's minds about climate change, is it actually positive good if at the end there's a 7-foot cardboard iceberg in the landfill?
Yikes.
So my yikes, scrap
Let's
it.
take a vote.
Yeah.
What does everyone think?
Based on the scene, if you raise your hand. So I guess my question is, do you ever think about waste in the stagings of Hurricane Diane?
Yeah, I do. Actually, I do. Or just in general, in the theater, the ephemerality of it, how sustainably can we do these practices? Where can we get stuff, to make our sets and our materials, so we're not just buying brand new things. And then I have to tell you, there were actual appliances on the stage at New York Theater Workshop where this production was. It was so awful. But then we found people who really needed a new fridge, so we gave it to them. Cool. But I don't know. That's not really enough.
No, this is not me chastising.
No. It's me chastising myself. It's me. There's a great company called Superhero Clubhouse in New York City, and they are an ecological theater. They work a lot with young people. Cool. All of their productions are sustainable. They came to see Hurricane Diane and stayed after and said so nicely to me that they really, really hoped that I was following these various practices, which of course they'd never heard of. So They're an amazing organization to look up. They're really in using theater as a way to sort of like as a way to get people talking with each other, like as particularly young people, you know what I mean? And they help the young people make their own plays, and they're very focused on hope as an end goal. And I guess I would say that to me is not. I wouldn't want to start a writing process with knowing that hope has got to be my end goal, just because that wouldn't feel to me like an artistic process that is super interesting, just to me personally. But for the way that they are using theater, I think it's amazing. And they are, I have to say, in a better mood than I am. Like, they seem kind of resilient and optimistic, which is probably not a coincidence.
Cool. So what I also wanted to ask you about is gender and environmentalism is a conversation that's been ongoing, and often we view Earth as Mother Earth. That's been a movement for decades on decades, which is interesting because I don't think we treat women or the Earth particularly well. So in Hurricane Diane, Diane is trying to seduce women. There's a very specific call that Diane should not be played by a cis man. What were you thinking about in Hurricane Diane in terms of gender and climate change, environmentalism, what have you?
I was a little bit just trying to write a play with a lot of parts for women, just out of, just to do that. And I mean, I also, I had the idea that I would like to entertain myself by writing a story where a butch gardener came to town and seduced 4 housewives. That sounded like a fun time to me.
Yeah.
So those two unsophisticated reasons. And then I think sort of the other way, or sort of backwards from what you're talking about in terms of like this idea of the sort of the femininity of the natural world or something. I was interested in. I'm always interested in looking at female capacity to perpetrate or do harm or act in a power mongering way. And I partly that's about sort of expressing a part of myself. But I think also it's very important to me that it be allowed for female characters to occupy the full spectrum of human behaviors. And that includes many that are very ugly and unappealing. And in my life, like exploring my own complicity or perpetration or capacity to do harm is a practice of sort of moral interrogation or trying to keep myself accountable to myself or honesty or something like that. So I'm interested in extending that to my characters, my female characters. And I just think, like women are all kinds of things and are easily half of the problem, let's say, in any, given society, and to try to limit that is, I think, not ultimately empowering, even if it comes out of a sense of authentic or demonstrable, like, victimization. Like, do you know what I'm saying? I find this difficult to express.
Sure.
But I always feel like I'm a lesbian, and I always feel like lesbians have like a unique perspective on this. Like, if you want to hear about what women are capable of, like, ask a lesbian, because they'll tell you, like, they know that women are not nice. Like, they know because they get to, they see that the women are people.
Yeah.
That's all I mean.
Cool.
Women are people. That's my takeaway.
Go home. Women are people. Awesome. So before we head to the Q&A portion, which means all of you should have little questions buzzing around, I wanted to ask some of your advice for young playwrights, because like it was said, like, I really wanted this event to be kind of filling a gap I saw on Penn's campus, which I think playwrights, we kind of hide in our own little rooms, and we need to build like a community here on campus. So the main question I think I have is, what is your advice for those awkward few years right out of college when you're trying to make connections, trying to make a name, trying to convince people that like your Word doc actually is like really, really, really good?
Yep. That's a super good question. I mean, I think you could probably guess some of the answers. Like the way that you move in the theater is largely relationship based. You know what I mean? I think a lot of playwrights, they really hope that what will happen is that they'll email their play to Adam Greenfield at Playwright Horizons, and he will be like, oh my God, this is incredible. And then like from then on, they'll take off, which rarely but sometimes happens. But mostly what happens is that people know someone that they met in a class, or they know someone that they met while they were working the electrics grid at like some other show, and that person is interested in their work in some way, and then you go and you do a small thing with that person, and that person knows a third person, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you're all the time you're trying to make things with people, you know, if to whatever extent that's possible. Self-producing is a great thing. It's really a lot of work, and it's really worth doing. It's so much easier to do it in Philly than it is to do it in New York City. Yeah. Philadelphia is one of the cities that I most frequently recommend to people when they ask me where should they move if they live in like, you know, a rural area and they want to move to an urban area. It's extremely difficult to be an emerging theater artist in New York City right now.
Awesome.
So Philly is great. And do you know about Orbiter 3? Yes, they were a playwrights collective that had a similar implosion model to 13P, and they functioned out of Philadelphia and did an amazing series of plays. I thought new plays.
Cool, awesome. I feel like this question is asked to playwrights a lot, but I want to ask it. What is your take on the MFA debate? MFAs, when should you get them? Should you take out a loan for them?
You should never take out a loan to get an MFA. You should never. I'm still paying that damn thing off, and I taught to pay my tuition. Like I worked full time and still have those loans. I don't know what to say. I mean, I have a very fraught set of feelings about the MFA. Sure. My friend Ann Washburn and I started a series of playwriting workshops with master teachers, and our like tagline for this was like, where you can go to get stripped of your MFA. Like, you know, it's MFAs are at their worst, they're homogenizing. They inspire timidity. They curtail people's financial future, and it's not convincing to me that the way to learn how to be a great writer is to sit in a classroom. I just am not convinced by any of this. I'm a college teacher. I just don't believe necessarily in the conservatory model. But they're also, I'm in a university. There are also some incredibly great MFA programs that are that have a very liberated pedagogy and that pay you to go. And there are very few spots in them every year, obviously. But Yale is a good one. Brown is a good one. UT Austin, UCSD, San Diego. Those are the ones that are sort of at the top of my mind. That they have great teachers who really care about the writers that go there. They invest in them very heavily, and you can really become yourself there, as opposed to where I went. NYU, where you go and then they're like, you can't do this in your play. You know, like,
do what? Whatever.
Oh. You know, like just that would ever be a conversation in a writing classroom is so dispiriting. I can't even speak about it. So like, you know, you don't. That's not great for people.
Absolutely.
Okay, that's my strong opinion.
No, I liked it. Okay. I wanted strong opinions only. So since it's 6:38. I'm going to ask if anyone has questions. I'll hand this microphone. Oh, we have another microphone. Someone will hand you a microphone.
So what I wanted to really ask was something that is really essential about climate change is balancing the fact that I'm trying to find the right words to describe this without like getting too much into academic lingo but basically trying to balance the fact that things are going to get worse while also acknowledging that we need to do better and like also not saying like, oh, everything's going to be fine and allowing that to like kind of put you at an impasse where you're not actually doing anything. And how do you see that manifesting in your playwriting, I guess?
To Madeleine or to?
Yeah. To either of you, really.
I mean, I feel like my play takes part of that arc. You know what I mean? It goes from a place of complacency into a place of defiance, and then into a place of like elegy or grief. And maybe that's a part of the longer progression, which is to start in, let's say, to start in ignorance or to move into activation, or there's a moment of grief surely in people's activation process, and then all the way through to the place where it's like, if we can affect this, like we can acknowledge it and we can affect it at the same time. So I mean, cutting a piece of that larger, or building a play that takes 11 hours or something. Do you know what I mean? That could walk people through those stages.
A tweet I really loved, and yes, I'm citing a tweet, is climate defeat is as dangerous as climate denialism, which I really loved, because I think I credited myself too much for, like, I'm not my Republican family members who don't believe, like, the Earth's getting hotter, and then I let myself sit in, I can't single-handedly save the Earth, so I can't do anything. I think for me, writing the play that I'm writing as my thesis was more cathartic, and like I'm doing something, and then I can also do the little things I try to do in my daily life. If that answers that.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Hello. I just wanted to acknowledge that in this room we're humans, and our impact on the earth. So I wanted to ask, how do you make space to write in the experiences of non-humans and other species that we've affected, and not in the sense of writing them as cartoons or just animals that talk, but really species that are being affected by climate change?
I think that's an amazing question. I think the question of animals on stage, or animals like in human representation, is like a huge one and very, very interesting to me. I would say that I've taken it up in other plays that are not necessarily about human impact or they're about questions of caging versus liberation, which is sort of human oriented. But thinking about how to put an animal on stage, whether that means putting another species of being on stage, or whether it means asking human beings to understand or to imagine their way in to other consciousnesses, is, I think, incredibly important. That it doesn't happen in this play is just a regret of mine.
Are you thinking about your play Precious Little?
I was thinking about that play.
Would you mind sharing a synopsis to the audience?
Yeah, that play is about it addresses a number of themes that cross each other, but there's a gorilla character in the center of it, and the gorilla is played by a human being. It's played by an older woman, but thinking about trying to what can human language do to represent what we imagine consciousness that's different from ours sounds and is experienced, sounds like and is experienced as. That's sort of what that play is doing. There is a lot of, there are a lot of people who are thinking very seriously about the question of animals on stage, the question of ecology on stage, and they're more seriously than I. But I know which books they are, so if you want to ask me afterward, I could tell you.
I think your question makes me think of an art exhibit I saw in DC last weekend. It was by Judy Chicago, and it was on death and extinction. And in one room, Judy Chicago, she made a mask, like a mask of her own face, very similar to like a death mask, and had all these drawings of ways she could die, and wrote inscriptions like, what if I pass in my sleep? What if I have a stroke? And then in the next room, she did something very similar and repeated the process, but for ways in which animals are dying through climate change. The most moving one to me was, apparently there's an act called finning, where to make shark fin soup, they just cut the fin off a shark, so then it sinks to the bottom of the ocean and literally suffocates. And she captured that shark in the bottom of the ocean, and in very passionate lettering wrote over about finning and suffocation, something I never knew. And by having these two rooms next to each other, it very much equated, like, yes, we can easily put ourselves in the shoes of this 8-year-old woman who's imagining her own death, but like, are we not feeling that empathy for a shark, And that started, when I left that, I was like, we're definitely need to work more in that area of privileging the voices of the animals, the species that we've disrupted.
I mean, it's so tricky because, like, in theater, the only medium is, like, human bodies, like, human-shaped spaces, human language, human gesture. So you'd also, you know, it's like the question is, are you co-opting? You know what I mean? We don't know. There's so many unknowns about it. I mean, it's fertile, I think, but it's also, it's hard to say.
I think my fear would be, like, getting compared to times animals have been put on stage badly. Not to call out King Kong the musical, but
What are you talking about? That's the greatest puppet ever made.
Okay, yes. The animatronics are very impressive, but, like, the New York Times review said, you wrote a bad musical when it's focused on, like, a 60-foot animatron that can't talk. And I was like, oh no, you know?
Look, I know the guy who played the eyebrows of that ape.
Yeah, no, don't pass this along.
It was
I love
amazing, that puppet. That puppet was so incredible.
Sure. No, I'm not bashing the puppet. I want on the record, women are people. I love the King Kong musical puppet. Oh, Jessica?
I have a historical curiosity question. Do you know what enabled the emergence of more second stages? Was that a specific historical moment? I understand 13P did it, but
Yeah, it was us single-handedly.
yeah. What is it? What's happening? Is it there are more resources or less, or is it more interest in different kinds of theater, or is it a business? Do we know?
I mean, I can't imagine that there's that it's financially profitable for these nonprofit theater. I mean, anyway, they're nonprofit theaters, you know. But there was like a sudden like mushrooming up of like second stage theaters across the nonprofit theater in New York City. Anyway, theaters that had only had big stages suddenly now had 2 or 3, including like really little ones. Like Roundabout is an example. Roundabout had the Broadway space, and it had a fancy like main stage, and then now it has the Underground, which is a 90, not even 90 seats. I don't know that it happened all in like 2003, 4, 5. I think there might have been some foundational funding that kind of flooded in. The foundations came to understand that it was something that people wanted, and then that made it possible.
Maybe it's bound to education.
It might be education, Brooke is saying.
Theater, they didn't really start teaching theater. Like, I was just thinking about this or reading about it. Sorry. I agree with you about some of the MFA stuff, but I do think maybe I actually think theater education or like playwright education and even director education like is a growing field. They didn't really even start teaching theater classes like acting training until the 70s. Right. So 30 years later, maybe what do you do all of a sudden? I don't know. It's something to think about. There's more and more people out there like, where are we going to show my work? I don't know. Do you think that or no?
Wait, are you talking about the MFA, the growth of the MFA industrial complex, or are you talking about
kind of.
Are you talking about second stages?
I think second stages might relate to the growth of the MFA industrial complex.
Because they're more and more professionalized young writers coming out there being like, where's my...
And then professionalized young directors and trained actors. I don't know.
Yeah, that sounds plausible.
You don't think so?
It's not a bad thing. It's a great thing. It's not. I think it's totally... I don't know the answer. I think you're probably right, Brooke.
No, it's just throwing it out there. Oh, here we go.
I want to ask a question as someone who's sort of theater adjacent, perhaps. So I think there's a lot of really interesting things that have been moving around and circulating in your conversation, and one of them, I guess, when you ask the question, I forget exactly how the question is phrased. That's overarching. The overarching question of the conversation, but it strikes me that on one hand, the question of how to write a play that will move people to do something about climate emergency is one question. The other question about how to write a play about climate emergency or climate crisis is another, because some of what you're talking about, Madeleine, about the capacity of a play, like what things the medium does and what things it doesn't do, it strikes me that there's a space in between the temporal space that you're bringing up, the present and the will, and there's a space in between the defeat and denial, which is to say there's a being. There's a being in emergency, or there's a being in crisis, that it seems like theater, or the theater or play that you're describing, Madeleine, is quite capable of dealing with, in a sense. So I guess what I wanted to do, I don't know how exactly to, the question I guess to both of you is, or maybe to you, Sam, is part of what is driving this question about how to make work that will make people do something, and if so, then how do you think about that sort of potentiality of even what you found in Madeleine's plays?
Sure.
Because it seems like this is also a conversation that is animated by the fact that you have found a lot of movement, like you have found a lot of solutions in Madeleine's plays in certain ways, or something. You found something vital for you.
Yeah, definitely. If I'm questioning whether a play can move people to do things, Madeleine's work has definitely moved me to write more. So we already see the chain reaction there. I think maybe why I'm phrasing everything as like climate change plays need to make people do things when other theater should. I think when I write a play about anything else, I'm making art because I like to make art. I like to see my friends make art. I like people to enjoy my art. And it touches on other social issues. But I think for me with climate change, I feel like the clock is ticking so much that I don't have time to make a play that's just a nice play anymore. So when I write a play about climate change, I almost feel like I'm doing an injustice if it doesn't have some sort of end result, where I don't think I put the same pressure on my other plays. I think also I'm driven by the fact that I think we're getting numb to what we read in the headlines, just these absurd things that are happening. Australia, for example, I look at Twitter and I'm like, how more land than like Belgium has burned, and yet most of my day-to-day, like none of the conversations are to do about it, and I kind of feel like I'm going a little bit crazy. Like these things are happening, and if they're not talking, like are they actually happening? So in that way, just talking about it makes me calm, and having a play about it makes me more calm, and hopefully it makes other people slightly more calm. Did that answer some of your very well-worded question? Yes. Okay, cool, thank you.
So in terms of the immediate impact theater can have, and I'm not a playwright, but gone to some plays and I've read about theater in different places like prisons and in schools, and what kind of I feel like theater can have an immediate impact. So what do you feel like the responsibility or the role of the playwright to go into the community? Because I feel like people actually saying those lines, not just sitting in the stage, seeing it as the separate event that they're witnessing, but actually involved, saying the lines, getting those images in their head, being part of it. I feel like that can have an immediate effect because they're seeing something from a different perspective, they get a different idea about it. I know playwrights need to make a living, but what about just taking it right into the community and not even the second stage?
Well, Madeleine, I feel like you should talk about the Bard Prison Initiative, right?
Well, I could.
Yeah.
I mean, my feeling is, my day job is that I'm a teacher and administrator at Bard College, and I work in the Prison Initiative. So we are just, we're Bard College, but we're in 6 state facilities in New York State. And I mean, from my perspective, like the most effective theater encounters that I happen to have seen, in that environment, don't address the conditions of incarceration. They are Richard III or whatever, you know what I mean? Like, in other words, they are works of art that interrogate the human soul, if we can speak of such a thing. You know what I mean? That offer an opportunity for people who may be incarcerated or have some other condition that they're living under to just encounter works of art, to encounter works of art. So I personally feel kind of like that. I've seen that. I know its power. The theater companies that do things like that, like for example, there's a company called 10,000 Things in Minneapolis. They take classic works of theater and they take them to places like homeless shelters or like prisons, transitional housing, etc. And they very intentionally are taking works that they feel like everybody could find a way into, but that don't necessarily address topicality. You know what I mean? I don't know how good I would be, you know what I mean, at making a play. Certainly if you took this play, Hurricane Diane, and you tried to do it as a piece of community theater, that would, that I don't know what the takeaway would necessarily be from it, except women can be mean. Do you know what I mean? Like, or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not sure that it would serve that purpose, but I know that a play could. I think you're totally right. It could work that way, and also it could work too. So when we were doing this Hurricane Diane at this theater in New Jersey, where I'm in residence, in the town, this play is set in New Jersey, and I wrote it for a theater in a town in New Jersey, set it in that town. So as a way of giving that town where Hurricane Sandy had a direct impact, a thing to talk about, when we were doing that production, there were a number of sort of other events that we did around it. And one of them was like, it was like a skit that was a trial in which, written by a community member, in which Mother Earth sued humanity. It was a skit. It was an agitprop. Local high school students performed it. The place was sold out. People were super into it. It was incredibly great. And there was a bunch of things happening there. One, people were talking about these issues about environmental stewardship and sustainability. But two, the community was just speaking to itself. Like, people were just talking to each other, and then the conversations branched out, and people were remembering Sandy together, and then they were like, oh, you should join Citizen Action, and that kind of thing was happening. And I feel like that is priceless. There's lots of ways that you can foster that kind of community engagement, but plays are a great one. And so in that respect, I think, but that wasn't my play. My play, a lot of people walked out of it being like, I don't know. She seemed horrible.
Oh, Sarah. Oh, hi, Declan.
So I had a question. I think this song. But someone once described one of the problems of climate change to me as the fact that apart from deniers, even for people who believe it, it's an interesting problem because we're both the perpetrator and the victim. Mm-hmm. And so we have this thing where we need to stop what we're doing, but at the same time we're paralyzed by that victimhood. And so I guess I was wondering how, if we're going back to this idea of what are your plays trying to convince people to do, or lessons to teach, or whatever, how do you attempt to walk that line of not making someone feel so much like the victim that they're unable to act, or so much like the perpetrator that they feel wronged because they're also the victim? How do you reach that balance?
I think for me, what's important to remember is most of the perpetrating is not done by the people who are also most of the victims. Most of the victims of climate change are marginalized people, and the people perpetrating it the most are the people with the income, some of the most income-heavy countries, and some of the people with the most income in those countries. I think for me, when I write a play, because of the accessibility of theater, I almost know that if they're going to my show and this ever gets put up, it will probably skew more towards the perpetrators than the victims. I think that's a way I think about it. Yeah?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like in a play like Hurricane Diane, which has 5 characters, it's sort of like they're, 5 slices of one person. Do you know what I mean? And so it's like a little bit like you can farm out the different problems that actually all exist in all of us if we're living in this part of the world or whatever. One person is the savior, one person is the fear monger, one person is the denier, one person is the violent, the defiant. I'm the how dare you take away my straws type of person. You know what I mean? And so that's actually like a wheel of components of one individual that is split off into characters, and then you can sort of look at that, but it doesn't necessarily create the conditions for any particular outcome. with audience members.
You guys have been talking a bit about audience and the intent that you have in writing your work, and I'm curious what it is that you're thinking about when you're talking about a message and a purpose for that audience. Because Sam, you just touched on this idea that maybe the people going to your plays don't look like you, don't think like you, but then you have your own catharsis that you put into your plays. And I'm wondering, in both of these works in general, when you're writing about climate, how you balance your own artistic desires with who's actually going to consume it. I think it's an interesting conversation to have with something like Hurricane Diane that's been produced multiple times, and something like my thesis, which is a Word doc and half in an iPhone Notes app, and it's write this scene and someone should cry here. And so I'd like to think, Sierra, that I'll have a better answer for you in 2 years. What I know for sure is when I write it, something feels slightly better, but also I don't want that to be it and stop, period. I would feel upset if the only thing that comes out of this play is everyone walks away and they're like, oh, the playwright stopped being anxious for 60 hours. That's really good for her. I don't know. I don't know.
That would be, I don't know. I feel like if I left a play and I thought, that playwright probably feels a lot better now, that would be a pretty huge takeaway.
Yeah. Everyone's do that, Sam. Feel less anxious. No, that's a really good question.
It's always an issue with writing plays because,
Yeah.
first of all, you never know who's going to be in your audience. You know what I mean? Even if you're the most cynical playwright in the world and you're the most successful, quote unquote, so you think your play is going to be at one of the fancier theaters. Even then, you don't know who's going to be in there. Whatever conversation you're having with them, is partly imaginary, projected, etc. But I feel like the thing that Sam's talking about doubling down on interiority and what is it that you really need to what conversations do you really need to have with yourself. That's having a lot of integrity about that is how you, this is so cheesy, but that's how you create universality on some level, I think. I will say that I know the audience at this theater in New Jersey where I'm a playwright in residence pretty well because I've done plays there before. I know what they and I know what makes them flip out. And it's interesting and fun for me to blend those two. You know what I mean? And then be there because I'm in residence. So then be there outside in the lobby while they stagger out, afterward and demand explanation from me or their money back, or they're that was so great or whatever. And that's a sort of exciting. That's really really fun. And that's actually why I set the play in that town. It's filled with all these jokes about a particular deli. Obviously, the deli jokes don't hit the same way. Yeah. God willing, the play goes on and is performed places where no one's ever heard of this deli. But if the jokes are turned the right way, you know what I mean, then they can have a life. It's not the same laughter of recognition. It's a different kind of laughter. But that's the project, I feel like, for playwrights. Even more, I think, than for novelists. You're trying to build something that has a lot of infrastructure. It has a lot of rebar, and yet there's a lot of space so that then when it goes out there, it gets put up and re-put up and re-put up, and different groups of people that you can never anticipate are making it their own. And I don't know, there has to be some connection between this thing that I'm saying right now and whatever it is that we want to be figuring out about how we should be addressing, the world that we're harming. I don't know what it is.
Could part of the problem in taking on such a large scale and in some ways abstract theme as climate change be that the temptation is to make a statement and to be guided by a theme and a message. But a play is kind of more like a conversation with characters. You need actors. You do need actors, whether it's mime or Samuel Beckett or whatever. You still need actors and language. And when you get into a conversation, when you start dealing with the internality of creating a character, sometimes the character doesn't want to go along with the program. You know what I mean? And sometimes a conversation may not go exactly in the politically correct way. So my question is, do you sometimes find that difficult and kind of a conflict within yourself as a writer when you're trying to figure out where's this story going?
Have your characters betrayed your politics?
Oh, interesting. I feel like my range of work is right now the amount of plays someone's written when they've only written plays for 3 years. So it's like a very small body of work. Based on those, I don't know, my thesis is very stylized. So I think the shittiest character is the mayor, which Brent read, who's just kind of like, he kind of like fetishizes how much the main character, Noah, is like worried about things. So because it's like reality but not reality, her job is to make a list for the mayor of everything that's going wrong. And he like has her keep reading it because he likes the way it sounds. I have, in the progress of writing this play, been like, oh, am I accidentally touching on something I didn't mean to touch upon? In the way that like he is her boss and then she agrees to like try and make a baby with him. And that's definitely in conversation with the Me Too movement and consent and power. And when I sat down to write that wasn't necessarily my original intention. My original intention was it's easier to get 3-person plays staged, so we'll make her sleep with this male character. But then I enter into an entirely different like mind space, you know?
That's so funny and tragic.
Yeah.
It's also easier to get plays staged if there's at least one guy in them.
Definitely.
Yeah, definitely, factually and with data to back it up. I feel like, a play that I'm working on right now is a Faust play set in a bowling alley about the end of patriarchy. And I have this devil character that he also has like a side hustle of selling like these protein shakes. And I was like, I'm really taking on the patriarchy in a very like forthright way. I'm really like, this play is very agitprop-y. It's really like my beliefs, whatever. Then I added up the lines and I was like, right, because the devil only speaks like 72% of the lines because it's so fun to write for the devil. Like, that's not my politics. That was an accident, but it just turns out that character, which is obviously coming from some part of moi, right? Like that part, that least savory part of me has the most dumb jokes to say in the play. So now I have to go back and like try and torque that around. But I think it's very easy, however much you think you're making one statement, to have characters run away with a play in a way you don't want. Are we done, Jessica? I just want to make sure that we're not.
Yeah, I think, we have a reception, so we can move in there if that sounds good, yeah?
Yeah.
Thank you so much to this
Thank you
audience.
so much.
Thanks for these questions.